My sister's voice carried across the ballroom like it had been sharpened first, not loud, not angry, just precise enough to cut. Before the story continues, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need them. Thank you for being here. I felt it before I understood it, that subtle shift in air, the way conversations soften when something cruel has just been said politely. The kind of silence that isn't empty, only waiting. Lydia stood near the center of the room, champagne flute lifted like a prop, posture flawless, smile calibrated for donors and cameras. My sister had practiced that smile the way other people practice piano, daily, relentlessly, with blood if necessary. And this, she continued, turning slightly so that her manicured hand could gesture toward me without quite pointing, is my little sister Mara. She's finding herself. A ripple of laughter followed, gentle and approving, the kind reserved for jokes that were supposed to be harmless. I stood near a marble column, clutching a plastic cup of sparkling water like it was proof I belonged here. I'd chosen it over champagne because I didn't trust my hands not to shake. 200 people in tailored suits and silk dresses slowly reoriented their bodies toward me. Not aggressively, politely, the way people look at art. They don't understand but have been told is important. Someone murmured, "Oh," another whispered, "That's her." I wore the nicest dress I owned. Navy, simple, expensive enough to hurt when I bought it, modest enough not to invite commentary. I had curled my hair in the hotel mirror with shaking fingers, and practiced standing straighter than I naturally did. I had even borrowed lipstick from a stranger in the restroom because I thought maybe color would make me look more legitimate. None of it mattered. Lydia's campaign banner hung behind her in elegant blue and silver. Lydia Hale for Congress. Her face stared down from 6 feet tall, confident, and retouched into someone I barely recognized as family. Our mother stood beside her, pearls tight at her throat, hands folded, eyes bright. She didn't laugh, but she didn't look at me either. That hurt more than the laughter. Still between careers, Lydia added lightly, as if finishing a weather report. Very flexible. More laughter. Softer now. Comfortable. I nodded. I don't know why. Some reflex learned in childhood. Agree. So it ends faster. I could feel heat climbing my neck, settling behind my eyes. My heartbeat became loud enough that I was certain the microphone would pick it up. I imagined it echoing through the speakers, betraying me as fragile, my older sister. 4 years ahead of me in age, decades ahead in approval. She had always been this way, controlled, polished, untouchable, the kind of person teachers adored and principals trusted, and neighbors pointed to when they needed proof that success could grow in ordinary soil. And me? I was the other one, the background note, the unfinished sentence, the one relatives asked about in lowered voices at holidays. So, what is Mara doing these days? The question was never meant to be answered. Lydia lifted her glass again. To community. To progress. To people who work hard and know where they're going. Applause followed. I didn't clap. My hands had gone numb. Behind the smile she kept trained for crowds. Lydia's eyes flicked to mine for half a second. There it was. The confirmation. She meant it. I became aware of details and sharp fragments. The scent of expensive perfume layered over catered food. The hum of the lights. The faint vibration of bass from music meant to sound hopeful. The way the floor felt too solid, like it might reject me. I thought of turning around, of walking out, of leaving without anyone noticing, but my feet didn't move, because some small, foolish part of me had come tonight hoping for something different. An introduction that sounded like family, a sentence that included respect, a moment where my name wasn't a disclaimer. I had driven 3 hours for this fundraiser, taken and paid time off from my own company, practiced neutral conversation in my car like I was preparing for a job interview I wasn't allowed to mention, and still, I stood there as Lydia accepted praise for her grounded values and strong upbringing, while I became a footnote she had edited out loud. Someone brushed past me and whispered, "Don't take it personally. She's under pressure." As if cruelty were a side effect. As if humiliation were collateral. My phone vibrated in my clutch, a notification from a system I had helped design. A silent confirmation that a city's power grid in another state had just repelled a coordinated intrusion attempt. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I already knew. I looked at my sister again. At the donors lining up to shake her hand. At the photographers waiting for her good angle. At the future she wore like a tailored jacket. And for the first time that night, something inside me hardened. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter, heavier. The kind of stillness that comes before storms. Because while Lydia believed she had just introduced me to her world, she had no idea what mine looked like. And she had no idea how closely our worlds were about to collide. I left the fundraiser without saying goodbye to anyone. No dramatic exit. No slammed doors. No teary confrontation in the parking lot. I simply walked out through the glass lobby, past the marble floors and framed photographs of smiling politicians, past the volunteer table, where teenagers handed out campaign stickers, past the security guard, who nodded at me like I belonged there, outside. The night air hit my face like clean water. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing, letting the sounds of traffic and distant sirens replace the hum of donor laughter. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window of a parked car. Navy dress, carefully styled hair, lipstick slightly smeared, eyes too bright. I looked like someone who had just left a room where she mattered, but I hadn't mattered in there. Not really. I unlocked my car, a matte gray crossover with a cracked plastic panel on the rear bumper, and slid into the driver's seat. No valet, no driver, no designer purse on the passenger side, just a canvas tote bag with a laptop inside and a granola bar wrapper at the bottom. My phone buzzed again. 3 more notifications, each one a system log update from a network monitoring dashboard that only 6 people in the country had clearance to access, each one confirming another attempted intrusion into a municipal infrastructure. System had been blocked. My system, my company's work, my invisible empire quietly holding pieces of the country together, while my sister posed for cameras pretending to save it. I started the engine and pulled into the empty street. As I drove, I let the radio stay off. Silence felt safer. No voices, no applause, no polished cruelty dressed as humor. Just the hum of tires on asphalt and the faint clicking of the turn signal. The city lights blurred past, and slowly, inevitably, my mind slipped into the world no one at that fundraiser knew existed. My real life, my other name, not Mara the lost sister, but Mara Hale, founder and CEO of Blackridge Security Systems, a cybersecurity firm with federal contracts, state-level infrastructure protection agreements, private sector clients that quietly included hospitals, water treatment facilities, and transportation grids. I had built it from a borrowed laptop and a folding table in a studio apartment that smelled permanently of ramen noodles. 6 years later, Blackridge employed 32 analysts, 12 engineers, and a legal compliance team that terrified most corporate boards. We ran a 24-hour operations center in Denver. We maintained encrypted links to federal agencies. We had just signed a 5-year contract with the Department of Energy, and tonight, while my sister joked about me finding myself, my team had been stopping a foreign botnet from probing a regional electrical grid. The irony sat in my chest like a bitter stone. I never told my family. Not at the beginning, when I was still afraid it might collapse. Not when we got our first government contract. Not when my bank account finally stopped hovering at survival level. Not even when a tech magazine ran a feature on the quiet architects of digital defense and included a photo of me standing in front of our operations wall. I never sent the article to my mother. I never forwarded the interview link to Lydia, because I wanted something simpler than admiration. I wanted to be loved without needing to present some, but love in my family came with prerequisites, titles, prestige, visibility. If success wasn't loud, it didn't exist. I drove out of downtown and onto the highway. The fundraiser lights faded behind me. My phone buzzed again. This time a call, ops center. I answered, voice steady. A familiar voice responded. Hey boss, just confirming the Cedar Falls incident is fully contained. No data loss, no system disruption. Good work, I said. Log everything. Send the report to the state liaison. Already done. You okay? You sound tired. I smiled faintly. Long night. I'm fine. We hung up. The car interior felt small, safe, private, honest. I thought about how Lydia's donors would describe me if they knew. Not between careers, not finding herself. They would call me dangerous, valuable, strategic, an asset, a liability, someone to court or fear. Funny how the same truth could transform a person completely depending on who heard it. I exited the highway and headed toward the small house I rented on the edge of town. No gate, no doorman, no security detail. Just a quiet neighborhood where dogs barked at raccoons and porch lights stayed on for comfort, not status. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed one light still glowing inside. Dad was awake. Again, he had been forgetting to turn lights off more often lately. For a moment, I sat in the car, engine off, keys still in my hand. Dad, Harold Hale, retired high school history teacher. Gentle voice, steady hands. The only person in my childhood who had asked me questions and waited for real answers. He used to sit with me on the porch when I was 10, pointing at the stars and explaining how navigation worked. How ancient sailors used patterns in the sky to find their way when everything else was darkness. Find your constant points, he would say. Everything else shifts. He had been my constant point. Lately, he was drifting, small things at first, repeating stories, losing keys, asking the same question twice in an hour. My mother brushed it off as normal aging. Lydia ignored it entirely, and I had been too busy building a company to notice how fast it was accelerating. I grabbed my bag and walked inside. Dad sat at the kitchen table in his robe, a mug of tea in front of him. The overhead light made him look thinner than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, his eyes distant in a way that scared me more than any hacker ever could. Mara, he said, relief softening his features. You're home. I am, I replied, setting my bag down. Why are you up? He looked at the mug. I wasn't sure if I'd had dinner. My chest tightened. I poured myself a glass of water and sat across from him. Did Mom go to bed? Yes, she was tired. Big night for your sister. Of course. I reached across the table and touched his hand. Dad, do you remember what tonight was? He thought for a moment. Lydia's work thing, fundraiser. That's right. He nodded, then paused. Did I embarrass you? My throat closed. No, I said gently. You did nothing wrong. He smiled. A small, trusting smile. The same one from when I was 10 and scared of thunderstorms. You always did fine, he murmured. You were the quiet one, the thoughtful one. I swallowed hard. If Lydia's cruelty had cracked something in me, Dad's vulnerability split it further, because suddenly, this wasn't just about being humiliated at a fundraiser. This was about time, about what could be lost while I was busy staying invisible. I walked Dad to bed and tucked the blanket around his shoulders. He fell asleep within minutes, breathing slow and uneven. I stood in the doorway watching him. Then I turned off the hallway light and went to my home office. 3 monitors flickered to life at my desk. A world of data, code, protection, control. On the center screen, my company's logo glowed softly. Blackridge Security Systems. I sat down, shoulders straightening. I had built defenses for cities, safeguarded critical systems, anticipated threats before they became disasters. And yet, the biggest threat to my family had walked right past me wearing a campaign, smile and a glass of champagne. I didn't know it yet, but tonight was not just humiliation. It was the opening move. I didn't sleep that night, not because of Lydia, not even because of the humiliation, but because of my father's confused eyes in the kitchen light, because for the first time, I realized I had been so focused on protecting invisible cities and anonymous systems that I had left my own home network unmonitored, and something inside it was failing. At 5:40 am, I was still sitting at my desk, scrolling through security logs and drinking coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. My office window faced the backyard. The grass needed mowing. Dad used to handle that. He hadn't touched the lawn in weeks. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I considered ignoring it, then answered. Miss Hale? The voice was male, older, calm, educated. The kind of voice that didn't waste words. This is Mara. My name is Thomas Calder. I attended your sister's fundraiser last night. I sat straighter. I don't believe we met. I said. We didn't, he replied. But I noticed you. That sentence would have unsettled me in any other context. But his tone carried no threat, just observation. Like someone stating the weather. I noticed, he continued, that you didn't laugh when your sister introduced you. You weren't embarrassed. You were calculating. I exhaled slowly. You're mistaken. No, he said. I've spent 40 years watching people who hide their true position in a room. Intelligence officers, negotiators, corporate strategists. You have the posture of someone who knows more than she reveals. Silence settled between us. Finally, I asked, "Why are you calling me?" "Because your sister's campaign is on my radar," he said. "And I believe you may want to know why." I didn't speak. I didn't hang up. So he continued, "I'm retired now. Former Deputy Director of the Federal Campaign Financial Oversight Unit. These days, I consult quietly for ethics review boards. Last night, I was invited by one of your sister's donors who requested an independent evaluation of her campaign's financial structure." I rubbed my temple. "You're saying you were auditing her, in a manner of speaking." And while watching her speak, I noticed something else. "Your father." My stomach tightened. "What about him?" He looked disoriented, confused. And when your sister finished her introduction, she glanced at him for approval. Not affection, verification, like checking whether a witness will stay quiet. A chill traced my spine. "You're reading too much into a family moment," I said. Though my voice lacked conviction, "Perhaps," Calder replied. "But in my experience, when a political campaign rises quickly and a family member appears financially dependent and cognitively vulnerable, there is often overlap." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "What kind of overlap?" "The kind that opens federal investigations," he said simply. I closed my eyes. Lydia, fraud, my father, vulnerable. None of those words belonged in the same sentence. "Why tell me?" I asked. "Because you are not who you appeared to be last night," Calder said. "And because if I'm correct, your sister's greatest risk factor is not her opponent. It's her family." I swallowed. "If you're wrong, you're asking me to suspect my own sister." "If I'm wrong," Calder said, "you lose nothing by being aware. If I'm right, you may be the only person positioned to prevent irreversible damage." I thought of Dad not remembering dinner, of Mom letting Lydia run everything, of Lydia's hand gesturing toward me like I was an accessory to her story. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," Calder said. "I only wanted to place a light where there may be darkness. Do with that what you will." He paused. "And if you decide to look, I can point you toward the right doors." He gave me an address and a time. Then he hung up. I sat motionless for a long while. The sun had started to rise, pale gold slipping across the backyard. Birds arguing over the feeder Dad used to refill every morning without fail. I looked at my screens. Threat dashboards, global attack maps, lines of data pulsing like heartbeat monitors. I protected systems that fed millions of people electricity, water, transportation, and I had not protected the one man who had taught me how to find constant points in the dark. I stood, walked to the kitchen and poured fresh coffee. Dad was still asleep. Mom's door remained closed. I stared at the mug in my hands. There are two kinds of breaches, the ones that announce themselves loudly, alarms screaming, systems shutting down, and the ones that slip quietly through. Trusted credentials, family credentials. By noon, I had made my decision. I texted my executive assistant, "Out of office this afternoon. Internal matters. Urgent." Then I opened a secure browser window and began pulling public financial records tied to Lydia's campaign, donor disclosures, payment distributions, Shell committee registrations. The surface data looked clean, but clean data can be staged. I needed deeper access. I needed someone who understood where the hidden corridors ran. TPM. I drove across town to a small brick office building with no signage except a single brass plate beside the door, Calder Advisory. The receptionist looked surprised to see someone my age, but she buzzed me through. Thomas Calder was waiting in a simple office. No grandeur, no ego, just shelves of binders and a pot of tea. "You came," he said. "I came to listen," I replied. He poured tea for both of us and slid a folder across the table. "Everything in here is publicly accessible. But most people don't know where to look. Inside were charts, timelines, transaction pathways, and a name, my father's, Harold Hale, listed as a guarantor on a campaign line of credit. My hand froze over the paper. "That's impossible," I whispered. Calder's eyes softened slightly. "It isn't," he said. "It's only hidden." I felt my pulse in my ears. Dad didn't even understand his television remote anymore. He couldn't open a credit line for a congressional campaign, which meant someone else had, using his identity. I sat back slowly, all at once. Lydia's fundraiser introduction replayed in my head. My little sister. still finding herself, not just dismissive, distracting. I looked up at Calder. If this is real, I said quietly, then my sister is not just humiliating me, she's endangering your father, Calder said. The room seemed to shrink, and in that moment, everything shifted. Not anger, not vengeance, just clarity. A threat had been identified, and I knew exactly how to neutralize threats. I didn't tell anyone what I'd learned. Not mom, not dad, not Lydia, not even my executive team, because once you see a breach, you don't announce it to the intruder. You trace it, quietly, precisely, without tipping off the source. By the time I left Calder's office, the sky had shifted into late afternoon amber. Cars hissed past on wet pavement from a brief rain. I hadn't noticed inside. My reflection in the windshield looked different, now. Not wounded, not lost, focused. I drove home with both hands on the wheel, knuckles relaxed, mind racing. Dad was in the living room when I arrived, watching a rerun of an old game show. He laughed at the wrong moments. Not because he didn't understand the jokes, because he forgot the question before the answer arrived. Mom was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, undoubtedly reading comments on Lydia's fundraiser photos. Dinner? She asked without looking up. I'll eat later, I replied. I kissed Dad's forehead. He smelled like aftershave and laundry detergent. Familiar, safe, fragile. Then I went to my office and locked the door. The next 8 hours were pure method. I opened a private workspace on my secure laptop. No company servers. No Blackridge systems. This wasn't corporate work. This was personal. I pulled every publicly available financial disclosure connected to Lydia's campaign. Donor reports, committee filings, payment routing, vendor invoices, consulting contracts, loan agreements. Most people would see neat columns and official stamps. I saw patterns. Campaigns, like networks, leave traces. Tiny inconsistencies in timing. Routing choices that don't match best practice. Money that takes unnecessary detours. At midnight, I found the first crack, a shell committee registered under a name that meant nothing. American Tomorrow Initiative. It had no website, no staff, no public activity. But it had processed 3 six-figure transfers into Lydia's campaign accounts, and the guarantor on the credit line attached to that committee. Harold Hale, my father. The room didn't spin. I didn't cry. I didn't slam the desk. I simply stared. There is a moment in every investigation when suspicion becomes certainty, when theory becomes structure, when the invisible turns solid. This was that moment. I took a breath and opened another window. Property records. A lien had been placed on my parents' home 6 months ago. $200,000. Issued by a private lender. Connected through 3 layers of corporate ownership to the same shell committee. The house Dad had paid off 15 years ago, used as collateral for my sister's political machine. Without his informed consent, I sat back. Slowly. This wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Identity misuse. Financial exploitation of a cognitively impaired adult. Campaign finance fraud. Bank fraud. Possibly wire fraud. I closed my eyes. For a brief moment, grief passed through me. Not for Lydia. Not for Mom. For the childhood I thought we shared. The idea of family I had carried long after it stopped being real. Then grief hardened into resolve. I needed corroboration. Legally admissible corroboration. Data alone was not enough. Documents could be challenged. Intent had to be proven. Capacity had to be assessed. Paper trails had to be traced to physical actors. I needed professionals. The next morning, I made 3 calls. First, Rachel Kim, corporate attorney, brilliant, sharp enough to carve diamonds. She answered on the second ring. Mara, everything okay? No, I said. And I need you in private mode, not company counsel, personal. Her tone shifted immediately. Tell me. I explained in clipped sentences. No emotion, just facts. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, she said, if even half of this is correct, this is elder financial abuse combined with campaign finance violations. You understand what that means? Yes, I replied. I also understand I need proof that survives court. Then you need a forensic investigator, she said, and a capacity assessment for your father. I'll handle the medical side, I said. Give me a name for the investigator. She did. Second call. Dr. Elaine Porter, a neurologist specializing in cognitive decline. I had met her at a charity conference 2 years ago. She owed me a favor after I quietly funded a research grant her department needed. She agreed to evaluate Dad discreetly within the week. Third call, Frank Delgado, forensic financial investigator, ex-Internal Revenue Service Criminal Division. The kind of man who treated fraud like a personal insult. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Send me everything you have. I'll find what you missed." I did. Within 48 hours, the situation escalated. Frank found transfers routed through 3 intermediary accounts. 2 of them were controlled by a consulting firm, Lydia had hired for strategic donor outreach. The third belonged to a trust recently established under Dad's name with Lydia as co-trustee. Dad didn't even know what day it was. That night, I sat beside him on the couch. He was watching the same game show again, laughing at the same wrong places. "Dad," I said gently, "do you remember signing any documents for Lydia's work?" He frowned. "She had papers. Said it was for taxes. Your mother told me to trust her. Do you remember what they said?" He shook his head. "No, but Lydia said it was important. That she was doing good things." His voice cracked on the last words. That was when I knew. Mom wasn't just blind. She was complicit, maybe not in crime, but in control. And Dad had been left defenseless between them. I tucked him into bed again that night. This time, I stayed longer, watching his breathing settle, memorizing the sound, because everything I did from this moment forward would be for him. Not for pride, not for revenge, for protection, for restoration, for justice. The next morning, Frank called. "I have enough for subpoenas," he said. "Banking irregularities, forged digital signatures, and unauthorized fiduciary actions. But if you want this airtight, we need federal coordination." "I know someone," I said, "Thomas Calder." When I met him again, I didn't need to speak much. I handed him a folder. He reviewed it carefully. Then he looked up. "You've already built the case," he said. "I've just organized the data," I replied. Calder smiled faintly. "That is how cases are built." He picked up his phone. "I'll contact the Campaign Financial Crimes Task Unit." Quietly, controlled, no leaks. "Good," I said. "Because Lydia cannot know yet." Calder studied me. "You understand what happens when this moves forward. Your sister's career ends. Your family fractures. There will be press, public fallout." I thought of the fundraiser, the laughter, the way Mom avoided my eyes. "I understand," I said. "But my father deserves safety more than my sister deserves a stage." Calder nodded. "Then we proceed." I left his office and stepped into the cold winter wind. Some people think revenge is loud, dramatic, emotional, but real justice is quiet, careful, methodical, and already in motion. The most dangerous part of exposing a liar is convincing them you believe the lie. I learned that quickly. By the time the preliminary reports reached Calder's contacts and federal oversight, Lydia's campaign had unknowingly stepped into a controlled perimeter. Every major transaction flagged, every call logged, every digital signature mirrored for forensic comparison. But none of it mattered if Lydia realized she was being watched. If she panicked, she could destroy records, coach stories, move money, or worse, disappear. So my role became something I'd never played before. The supportive sister, the one who finally came around. It started with a phone call. "Mara?" Lydia's voice carried surprise. She never called me unless she needed something or wanted to show an audience. She was a loving sibling. "Hi," I said. "I saw the fundraiser photos. You looked confident." She laughed lightly. "You were quiet last night. I hope I didn't embarrass you." The audacity of the question almost broke my composure, but I swallowed and said, "No, I know you're under pressure." I wanted to be there. A pause. Lydia recalibrating. Then warmth entered her voice. "That means a lot, really. I know we haven't always connected, but I want us to be closer." I stared at the wall where Frank's printed transaction charts were taped in clean rows. "I'd like that," I replied. From that moment on, I became her ally. At least in her eyes. I sent supportive texts after debates. I commented politely on campaign posts. I even accompanied Mom to a brunch event where Lydia shook hands with retirees who donated in exchange for photographs. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role. Inside, I watched everything. How Lydia never let Dad speak for himself. How she intercepted any questions directed at him. How Mom stayed close to him like a handler. It was choreography, and I was studying the dance. One afternoon, Lydia invited me to her campaign office. I accepted immediately. The building was downtown, modern, glass-walled, open concept. Posters of Lydia's face lined the hallways. Young staffers rushed between cubicles, carrying coffee and clipboards, speaking in rapid-fire acronyms. Lydia gave me a tour. "This is where the magic happens," she said proudly. I smiled. "It looks impressive." She led me into her private office. The door closed softly behind us. "Mara," she said, leaning against her desk, "I want to apologize if I've ever made you feel left out." That was Lydia's version of an apology. Vague, directionless, untraceable. I tilted my head. "I appreciate that," she exhaled. "I just worry about you. You don't talk about your work. You don't show people what you're building. It makes it hard to support you." I met her eyes. "You've never asked," I said quietly. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Guilt or calculation? With Lydia, it was impossible to tell. Then she smiled again. "Maybe we can change that. Start fresh." "Maybe," I agreed. And just like that, the trap settled tighter around her without her realizing it. Over the next week, Calder informed me that federal oversight had escalated the case. The evidence from Frank and Rachel had been combined with campaign finance discrepancies already under review. They needed one thing now, a clean moment of exposure, a place where Lydia would be present, surrounded by witnesses, with minimal risk of flight or destruction of evidence. And Lydia, in her hunger for visibility, provided it herself. "The televised town hall is next Friday," she told me during a family dinner. "Regional network, live audience, donors, press, everyone important." Mom beamed. Dad smiled vaguely. Lydia turned to me. "You'll come, right?" I lifted my glass of water. I wouldn't miss it. Behind my calm exterior, the plan aligned like gears clicking into place. Calder coordinated with the Federal Campaign Financial Crimes Task Unit, local law enforcement, network legal counsel, quiet warrants, quiet confirmations. Frank finalized the forensic trace proving Dad's identity had been used without informed consent. Dr. Porter completed Dad's capacity evaluation. The results were clear: mild to moderate cognitive impairment, limited financial comprehension, high suggestibility. In other words, he could not legally consent to the financial actions taken in his name. The case was no longer hypothetical. It was ready. But there was one more thing I needed to do: protect Dad from the fallout. Rachel and I spent a long afternoon drafting legal documents: emergency guardianship petition, financial restraining orders, protective trust structures. I signed paperwork transferring temporary guardianship authority to myself pending court review. Once filed, Lydia's co-trustee status over Dad's finances would be frozen. She wouldn't know until it happened, and by then, it would be too late to interfere. That night, I sat with Dad in the backyard. The sky was clear, stars scattered across darkness like pinpricks of truth. He wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "Your sister is doing important things," he said softly. "She'll make a difference." I looked at his lined hands, the ones that had held my bike steady when I learned to ride, the ones that had carried groceries when Mom was sick, the ones that now trembled slightly when he lifted his tea. "She already has," I said. He smiled. "You're a good daughter." My throat tightened. "I'm trying to be," I replied. He patted my hand. "That's all any of us can do. If only that were true." When I tucked him into bed that night, I kissed his forehead and whispered, a promise he would never fully understand. "No one is going to hurt you again." The day of the town hall arrived faster than I expected. Lydia stood in front of the bathroom mirror rehearsing lines. Mom adjusted her necklace. Dad sat on the couch, ready to early, coat on, confused but cooperative. We drove together, a perfect family to blow heading toward public triumph. Lydia held her phone, reading praise. Mom checked Facebook comments. Dad watched passing street lights. No one noticed my hands were steady, because by then, I had already accepted something crucial. This was not revenge. This was containment. A threat to a vulnerable system had been identified, and the neutralization sequence was already running. The television studio smelled like hairspray, hot lights, and nervous ambition. We arrived an hour before broadcast. Lydia swept through the entrance like she owned the building, greeting producers by name, touching shoulders, laughing just loudly enough to be remembered. A makeup artist hurried toward her. A sound technician clipped a microphone to her blazer. A young assistant handed her a tablet loaded with talking points. She thrived in this environment. This was her ecosystem. And tonight, she believed she was stepping onto the stage that would launch her into Congress. Dad walked slowly beside Mom. He wore the same navy suit from the fundraiser. It hung a little too loose on his thinning frame. He smiled at everyone who passed, even when they didn't look at him. I stayed close. A quiet shadow and a one stopped me and a one questioned why the lost sister was here. Invisible has its advantages. Calder had told me where to stand. Second row. Left aisle. Clear line of sight to the exit doors. Close enough to Dad to move quickly if he got overwhelmed. Close enough to Lydia to watch every flicker in her expression. I sat down, smoothed my coat, crossed my legs, folded my hands. If anyone looked at me, I appeared calm. Inside, every part of me was alert. This wasn't rage. This wasn't hatred. This was execution of plan. The town hall began with swelling intro music. The host, a polished news anchor with teeth to perfect to trust, stepped into the spotlight. Cameras rolled. Audience applause rose on cue. Good evening, and welcome to the Regional Citizens Forum. Tonight, we welcome congressional candidate Lydia Hale. Lydia walked onto the stage to applause. Waving, smiling, embodying hope with the precision of someone who had rehearsed it in the mirror since adolescence. Mom dabbed her eyes proudly. Dad clapped slightly off rhythm. I watched. Lydia's hands, people who lie comfortably, often forget their hands. Fingers tighten, thumbs rub, palms dampen. Lydia's hands were steady. She didn't know. The questions began. Education reform, tax policy, healthcare. Lydia delivered answers like a machine designed for persuasion. Emotional hooks, relatable anecdotes, carefully vague promises. The audience nodded, applauded, laughed on cue. 15 minutes in, Calder's text arrived. Teams in position. Warrants confirmed. Proceeding on your signal. I read it once, deleted it. My heart beat evenly. A strange calm had settled over me hours ago. The kind that comes when there is no uncertainty left. Only timing. Another question. Another applause. Then the host turned to Lydia. Candidate Hale, transparency has become a major topic in this election. Voters want to know who funds campaigns and how those funds are managed. How do you respond to concerns about campaign finance accountability? The question had been planted. Calder's doing. Lydia smiled graciously. I believe transparency is essential, she said. My campaign follows every law and disclosure requirement. We have nothing to hide. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the audience, toward Dad, toward me, then back to camera. And I'm proud to say, we run a clean operation. The words barely finished leaving her mouth when the side doors opened. Not dramatically, not loudly, just two men and a woman in plain suits, entering the studio floor with quiet authority, headsets, badges, calm movements. The host faltered, mid-breath. Audience murmurs rose, cameras kept rolling. Live broadcast, Calder's voice echoed in my memory. Controlled environment, no escape, no destruction of evidence. One of the agents approached the stage, spoke briefly to the host. The host's eyes widened but professionalism held. Ladies and gentlemen, the host said slowly, we have been informed that federal authorities need to speak with candidate Hale regarding an urgent matter. We will continue coverage. Lydia's smile didn't drop immediately. That was the most surreal part. For 3 seconds, she believed this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that would pass if she stayed composed. Then the lead agent stepped up beside her. Miss Lydia Hale, he said clearly into his microphone. I am Special Agent Ruiz with the Federal Campaign Financial Crimes Task Unit. We have a warrant to question you regarding financial misconduct, fraudulent use of fiduciary authority, and misuse of identity in campaign financing. Silence. Absolute. Total. And no applause. No murmurs. Just shock. Mom gasped audibly. Dad looked around confused. Is this part of the show? He whispered. I leaned closer. No, Dad, I said softly. But you're safe. I promise. On stage, Lydia's composure finally cracked. This is outrageous, she said. There must be some mistake. Agent Ruiz remained steady. This warrant has been approved by federal court. We need you to come with us. Lydia's eyes darted across the studio. Producers, camera operators, audience. Her staff frozen in place. Then her gaze landed on me. second row, left aisle, still, watching. Understanding dawned in her expression, not fear, recognition of the one person she never considered a threat, me, Mara. She mouthed. I didn't respond, because this was no longer a family conversation. This was the consequence of her choices. AS agents escorted Lydia off stage. The broadcast dissolved into chaos. Producers shouted. Cameras swung. The host attempted damage control. Audience members pulled out phones. Mom burst into tears. Dad held her hand, uncertain why. I stood, moved to Dad's side. Come on, I said gently. Let's go home. Outside the studio, flashing lights reflected off parked cars. Reporters already gathering. Microphones raised. Questions shouted. Candidate Hale. Did you misuse donor funds? Is this connected to campaign loan irregularities? Did you exploit a family member's finances? Lydia kept her chin high as she was guided into an unmarked vehicle. But her eyes searched the crowd once more, found me, and in that moment, everything she had built collapsed silently behind her, not in anger, not in drama. In inevitability. Dad squeezed my hand. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why are they taking Lydia? I opened the car door for him. Because she made very serious mistakes, I replied. And now grown-ups are fixing them. He nodded slowly, satisfied, trusting. We drove away from the studio as sirens faded behind us. Mom stared out the window, shaking. No one spoke, because some truths are too large for immediate words. But as the city lights blurred past, I felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not revenge, resolution. The storm had broken, and the air, finally, was clear. The house was too quiet when we got home. Not peaceful, quiet. The kind that happens after something heavy breaks and the dust hasn't settled yet. Dad sat on the couch, still wearing his coat. Mom stood near the kitchen counter, hands pressed together like she was praying, though I knew she hadn't prayed in years. The television in the living room replayed the town hall footage on a loop. Lydia's face frozen mid-smile. Agent Ruiz, stepping forward. The host losing control of the broadcast. Headlines already crawling across the bottom of the screen. Congressional candidate Lydia Hale detained on financial crime warrant. Dad squinted at the screen. Why are they showing this again? He asked. Mom snapped the television off. Silence returned. I took Dad's coat from his shoulders. Let's get you into something comfortable, I said. He allowed me to guide him to his bedroom like a child who trusted me without question. When I tucked him in, he looked at me with watery eyes. Is Lydia in trouble? Yes, Dad, I said gently. But you're safe. He reached for my hand. You always were the steady one, he whispered. Then he fell asleep. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe, because once upon a time, he had carried me when I fell off my bike. He had stayed up late helping me build my first computer from mismatched parts. He had told me stories about people who use knowledge to protect others, and tonight, I had finally done that for him. When I returned to the kitchen, Mom was pouring herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. She didn't look at me. This will destroy her, she said, quietly. I leaned against the counter. She destroyed herself. Mom's grip tightened around the glass. You have no idea what it takes to be someone in this world, she said. To be admired, to be respected. I met her gaze. I run a cybersecurity firm that protects national infrastructure, I said. I employ 44 people. I manage federal contracts. I hold security clearances you wouldn't believe existed. I am respected. Mom blinked. For the first time in my life, she looked at me without assuming she already knew who I was. But instead of pride, something like fear flickered in her eyes. You could have told us, she whispered. I wanted you to love me without credentials, I replied. That was my mistake. Mom sat down slowly at the table. Lydia said you were drifting. I almost laughed. She needed me to be drifting, I said. Because as long as I was small, she stayed tall. Mom covered her face. I didn't know she was using your father's name, she said. If I had known you did know, I interrupted quietly. You handed her the documents. You told Dad to trust her. You watched him sign papers. He didn't understand. Mom's hands fell away from her face. Tears slid down her cheeks. I thought she was doing good things, she said. I thought she was saving this family. I softened then, just slightly. She was saving herself, I said. And she used him to do it. Mom sobbed quietly at the kitchen table. I didn't comfort her, not yet, because some lessons need to sit in silence before healing begins. The next morning, the house buzzed with phone calls, journalists, lawyers, neighbors pretending concern, but hungry for details. Mom answered, none of them. She let the landline ring until the machine clicked on. I made my own calls. Rachel filed the emergency guardianship order with the court. By noon, I had temporary legal authority over Dad's medical and financial decisions. Frank sent me confirmation that Lydia's access to Dad's accounts had been frozen. Dr. Porter scheduled Dad's ongoing cognitive care plan. Called or texted once. She's being processed. Evidence secured. You did well. I deleted the message because I didn't want congratulations. I wanted normalcy, but normal had been rewritten. 3 days later, I sat across from Lydia in a visitation room. She wore a gray jumpsuit, no makeup, no polished hair, no controlled lighting, just fluorescent bulbs and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. She stared at me through the glass partition. They allowed no physical contact, only a phone receiver. I picked up mine. She picked up hers. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Lydia exhaled. I should have known, she said. You always watched more than you spoke. I studied her face. Without performance, she looked almost younger, almost human. Why? I asked. Why, Dad? She looked away. Campaigns are expensive, she said. Donors expect momentum. Visibility costs money. And Dad had good credit, clean history, a house free and clear. You used his mind against him, I said. He trusted me, she replied simply. People like him trust titles. Trust, confidence. I provided both. The coldness of it settled between us. I leaned forward. You could have asked me for help, I said. I would have funded your campaign legally if you'd been honest. She laughed once, sharp, bitter. You? She said. The invisible sister who never told anyone she mattered? I didn't want power, I said. I wanted family. Lydia's eyes softened, just for a second, and I wanted to be someone who could never be ignored again, she said. We stared at each other, 2 daughters built from the same house. Same parents, same dinner table, same expectations, but entirely different survival strategies. I set the receiver down. I'll take care of Dad, I said. Lydia swallowed. Tell him I love him. I paused. I will. I walked out without looking back. Weeks passed. Court hearings, legal filings, medical appointments, press statements released through attorneys, campaign donors demanding refunds, political opponents issuing polite condemnation. Social media tearing Lydia's reputation into digital confetti. Dad settled into a gentle routine. Morning tea, garden chair, birds at the feeder, occasional confusion, frequent warmth. He didn't ask about Lydia again. Not because he didn't care, because his mind no longer held space for prolonged grief. In a strange way, that was mercy. Mom moved through the house like a ghost, cooking meals, folding laundry, sitting quietly beside Dad. She didn't mention Lydia's name either. We existed in parallel silence. Then one afternoon, as I helped Dad into his sweater, Mom stood in the doorway. I was wrong about you, she said. I turned. You built something real, she continued. And I didn't see it because it didn't look like what I understood. I nodded. I don't need an apology, I said. I need Dad safe. That's all that matters. Mom wiped her eyes. He is safe, she said. Because of you. For the first time, I allowed myself a small breath of release. Not triumph, not revenge, just balance restored. That night, I returned to my home office. My company's operations dashboard pulls softly. Systems online. Threats contained. Networks protected. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. Not code, not legal records, just a blank page. Because for the first time in my life, I didn't need to hide who I was. The world now knew Lydia, but soon, it would also know me. Not as the lost sister, not as the shadow, but as the woman who quietly rebuilt what arrogance had broken. And the final chapter of that story was still to come. 6 months after Lydia's arrest, I stood on the rooftop terrace of a federal building in Denver and watched the city wake up. The sun rose slowly, casting light over glass towers, quiet streets, and the distant mountains that never changed, no matter how human lives rearranged themselves beneath them. This rooftop didn't exist. A year ago, Blackridge Security had designed its digital defense infrastructure. But the physical redesign, the green space, the water-efficient garden beds, the quiet seating areas for employees who worked too many night shifts, that had been my personal addition. A thank you gift to a team that never saw applause, never took bows, yet kept entire systems alive. Below me, my company's logo glowed on a secure operations floor behind reinforced glass, not hidden, not whispered, real, recognized, visible. I wasn't wearing a dress today. I wore jeans, boots, and a Blackridge jacket. My hair was pulled back, no lipstick, no borrowed presentation of legitimacy. I didn't need to perform anymore. My phone buzzed. Rachel, guardianship finalized, she said. You're officially your father's legal protector. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. When I hung up, I stayed where I was for a while longer, letting the wind carry away the last threads of a life that no longer fit. Dad was sitting in the backyard when I got home that evening. He wore a straw hat. One of his tomato plants had grown crooked, and he was trying to gently guide it upright with a wooden stick. When he saw me, he smiled like the world was simple again. Look, he said proudly. It's growing. I crouched beside him. It is, I said. You're doing great. He handed me the watering can. I poured carefully, steady hands, slow movements. We didn't need big conversations anymore. Presence had replaced explanation. Dad didn't ask about Lydia. Mom didn't bring her up either. We had settled into a new rhythm. Quiet, honest, functional, not perfect, but real. Lydia's trial never went to dramatic court television. It was procedural, efficient, undeniable. The evidence was overwhelming. Unauthorized financial actions, forged digital signatures, misuse of fiduciary authority, campaign finance violations. She accepted a plea deal. No prison theatrics, no screaming innocence, no last-minute redemption arc, just a judge's gavel and the sound of a door closing on a life built from image instead of integrity. She was banned from holding public office, ordered to repay funds, placed under probationary supervision. When her sentence was read, I felt nothing sharp, only a quiet sense that a storm had finally completed its cycle. Months passed. Blackridge expanded. A national contract for transportation infrastructure security, a partnership with a medical data protection consortium, invitations to speak at cybersecurity summits. This time, I accepted, not because I needed applause, but because invisibility had been a choice born from longing. Now it was no longer necessary. My first conference keynote. The host introduced me as Mara Hale, founder and CEO of Blackridge Security Systems, one of the nation's leading architects of digital infrastructure defense. The audience clapped. I stepped to the podium, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing on someone else's stage. This one had been built by my own hands. That night, I sat beside Dad on the porch. The sky was clear, stars bright. He looked up and pointed. Do you remember, he asked, when I taught you how to find the North Star? I smiled. I do. He nodded. You always liked knowing where you were. I held his hand. I still do. He leaned his head against the back of the chair. You found your place, he murmured. I looked at him, my father, fragile, warm, safe, then at the house, now financially secure, legally protected, peaceful, then at the quiet street where no cameras waited, no donors whispered, no applause demanded performance, just life, simple, true, constant. And I realized something that Lydia never had. Power that must be displayed is fragile. Power that simply exists needs no stage. I kissed Dad's forehead. Get some sleep, I said. He smiled and closed his eyes. Later, in my home office, I opened the document I had started weeks ago. Not code, not contracts, just words. A record, not for the public, not for revenge, but for myself, because stories matter. They remind us who we were before we became who we are, and who we chose to protect along the way. I saved the file under a single name, The Constant Point. Then I shut down my computer, turned off the light, and went to bed. Tomorrow, there would be meetings, systems to protect, employees to lead, a father to care for, a life to live, not perfect, not polished, but real, and entirely my own.